Australia. Depending on the language group or clan, there are several Aboriginal stories about the origins of the Pleiades. Some Oceania indigenous Australians believe that the Pleiades are the women who were nearly raped by Kittilä, the man this month. In a legend told by the Wurundjeri people of southeastern Australia, the Pleiades are represented by 7 Hieroglyphic sisters. These women are the first to have the secret of fire, and each of them carries embers at the end of the digging stick. Although they refuse to share coal with anyone, they are tricked into giving up their secret by Crow, who then brings fire to mankind. After this, the Hieroglyphic sisters swept across the night sky. The fire shot blazed into the bright star of the Pleiades cluster. Another version, which Gabriella Possum Nungarai often paints because it is her dream, or creation story, the daughter of the late Clifford Possum Japultjeri of her Papuan desert art movement, depicts the story of 7 Napultjeri sisters being chased by a man named Jilby Tjakamara. He tried to practice love magic on one of the nuns, but his brother didn't want to be with him, and ran away from him along with his sister. They sat on Uluru to look for honey ants, but when they saw Jilby, they went to Kurlanyalimpa and, with the spirit of Uluru, turned into a star. Hawaii. There is an analog holiday in Hawaii known as Makahiki. New Zealand. Occurs the 20th of June to the 22nd of June. Maruaroa o Takurua is seen by New Zealand Maori as the middle of winter. It follows directly after the awakening of the Matariki Pleiades, which marks the start of the new year and is said to be when the sun turned away from its northern journey with its winter bride Takurua, star Sirius, and began its journey back to its youth. Summer Hinaramati bride. In Swahili from East Africa they are called Kilimia, Proto-Bantu * Ki Dimida in Bantu regions E, F, G, J, L, and S, which comes from the verb 5, which means to dig, or to cultivate, because their visibility is taken as a signal to prepare for non-Saharan Africa excavations when the onset of rain is near. In the Sesotho language closely related to the Basotho people of South Africa, the Pleiades are called Selim Se Setshahadi, female cultivator. The disappearance in April, 10th month, and the appearance of the Achernar star heralds the start of winter. Like many other South African cultures, Basotho attributes its visibility to agriculture and more. Theosophy. Modern belief in theosophy. It is believed that the 7 stars of the Pleiades concentrates the spiritual energy of the 7 rays from the galactic logos to the 7 great bear stars, then to Sirius, then to the sun, then to God on earth, Sanat Kumara, and finally through the 7 masters of the 7 rays to us. UFO. In Apology, some believers describe the Nordic extraterrestrials, called Pleiadians, as originating from this system. In New Age lore, some believe that the Sun and Earth will pass through the belt of photon from the Pleiades, causing catastrophes and or initiating spiritual transitions referred to as consciousness shifts, great shifts, shift of the ages. Barbara Marciniak, author of Bringers of the Dawn, is one of the authors who contributed to the New Age myth about ET Pleiadian creatures related to human descent. The white tiger from the west of the 7 sisters. Maybe the story of the Lemurian who left the Earth to settle on another planet is a little absurd, but we need to know that their technology at that time was very advanced. Their mastery of space exploration technology might have been realized in long ago. Of course, the mastery of the same technology in our era of civilization has not yet been matched by the technological advances they have created. From the few stories that are described, it can be concluded that the Lemurians were not destroyed by the earthquake and flood as experienced by the Atlanteans, but because of the war that made some of them fall. Meanwhile, since the defeat by the Atlanteans, Lemuria was automatically controlled by the Atlanteans, until finally the land was hit by a very terrible disaster which then drowned it along with several other lands, including Atlantis itself. The Indian Ocean contains a long continent from the Sunda Islands along the southern coast of Asia to the east coast of Africa. This huge continent is currently renamed the former Cali. Sclater, an Englishman, has called it the Continent of Lemuria. It is possible that this name is taken from the name of a monkey-like animal that inhabited the region, which is probably the first time here to develop anthropoid apes, as well as many assumptions and estimates of the possibility of human life and origin there is. Alfred Wallace has proved this, with chirological facts, in the present fact that the Malay archipelago consists of 2 completely different parts. The Western Division, the Indo-Malayan archipelago, which consists of the large islands of Borneo, Java and Sumatra, was previously linked with Malacca with the Asian continent, and possibly also with the Lemurian continent. The Eastern Division, on the other hand, is the Austro-Malay archipelago, which consists of Celebes, Maluku, New Guinea, Solomon Islands, which were previously directly connected to Australia. The two divisions were previously two continents separated by straits, but for now mostly submerged below sea level. The division of Wallace, solely on the basis of accurate chirological observations, may even be the most accurate way of determining the position of this strait, which is at the southern tip of the sea between Bali and Lombok. So since the ice melting that is on Earth, the boundaries of water and land have changed in shape and extent, and we can be affirmed that the shape and extent of continents and islands have never been fixed in a matter of hours or even in a minute. Other causes is by the accumulation of mud, which solidifies to solid rock and the sea level rises as new islands. No geography is formed, which is without a geological basis. The name Lemuria, as stated above, was originally adopted by Mr. Claytor, which may be the name of this continent derived from the name of the Lemuroid species that live and thrive on this island. Writes A.R. Wallace, there is no doubt and it is very likely that this assumption is correct. This is where research from the geographic distribution of these animals can be examined and concluded. This continent is what is probably the main zoology of the region there in some geological epochs past. If we consider that it comprises the entire area which is now inhabited by Lemuroid animals, of course its territory along from West Africa to Burma, South China and Sulawesi, the areas where this animal might live and live. In other writings that refer to the past relationship between the sub-regions of Ethiopia and Madagascar, also mentioning the spread of Lemurian species. This view is supported by the basis of geological research in India, which shows us that Ceylon and South India are mainly known from granite and metamorphic old, while most of the peninsula is a tertiary formation, with a few isolated patches of secondary rock. This happened over a period of time in the tertiary period. Ceylon and India were bounded by a large part of the sea, and may have formed part of a vast continent or large island. It was common for the spread of fauna with Malaya, when it was still a large plain and the Hindustan continental plate was formed, with a very rich soil and a wide variety of Himalo-Chinese fauna. Rapid immigration of new animal species took place too, and many types of mammals and birds as well. Extinct. There are also reptiles and insects that survive, or older forms that can withstand local conditions or displaced, so that between these groups alone we can find a large number of animals which may include the ancient remains of fauna from the now submerged southern continent. The affinity between the animal and plant fossils of the African Beaufort group and those of the Indian and Cathmus panchets is just as there have been any similarities to the soil relationship between the two regions. But the similarities of the fossilized African and Indian fauna do not stop with the Permian and Triassic times. The initial plant source of the Uitenhage group had 11 plant forms, 2 of which were Mr. Tate has identified similarities with the Indian Rajmahal-ridden plant. Ernst Haeckel, a hypothetical sketch of the monophyletic origin and development of the 12 human races on Earth from Lemuria, Naturliche Schaffungsgeschichte, Plate 15. Conclusion: facts based on flora and fauna. In the early Permian, as in the post-Pliocene age, cold climates headed towards lower latitudes, and tended to be present in both hemispheres together. With a decrease in cold temperatures, the flora and fauna of the Permian reptiles spread to Africa, India and possibly Australia, or the flora may have existed in Australia earlier, and have spread from there. India, South Africa and Australia, which are connected by Indo-Oceanic continent in Permian era, and the two remaining parts remained connected, with only a brief period of interruption, until the end of the Miocene period. During both parts of time this land is also connected with Malayana. In general, with some of the previous writers, I consider that the position of this land is defined by the various coral reefs that now exist between the Arabian Sea and East Africa. Until the late Nummulitic period there was no direct connection. Except perhaps for brief periods there was between India and West Asia. Quote. In the discussion that Professor Ramsey participated in, agreed with the views of Africa with India and Australia on geological unity in the past. Mr. Woodward is pleased to find that the authors have added further evidence, derived from fossil flora from the Mesozoic series from India, in evidence corroborating the views of Huxley, Sclater and others as evidence of the former existence of an old submerged continent, Lemuria, which Darwin's research on coral reefs had long predicted. The existence of one other continent, apart from the 5 continents that exist today, wrote Ernst Haeckel, in his book, The History of Creation. Not Australia, or America, or Europe, the source of early prehistoric human civilization, or the so-called paradise, which is the cradle of mankind. currently take a different form from the shape of the continent that is now. The circumstances, especially chirological facts, which state that the ancient home of earlier humans originated from the present continent submerged below sea level, the Indian Ocean, which extended along the south from Asia, as in, and perhaps in direct connection with it, in the direction east, as far as India and the Sunda Islands, westward, as far as Madagascar and the southeast coast of Africa. We already know that there are many facts from animal and vegetable geography that the South Indian continent is very possibly the former part of the continent of Lemuria. Sclater has given an explanation that it is also likely that the origin of humans originated from Lemuria. In a subsequent work, Pedigree Man, Haeckel affirms the existence of Lemuria at several times as the beginning of the history of civilization on Earth. Here is an excerpt from Dr. Hartlaub's writings which may be this piece of evidence that supports the existence of the missing Lemuria. 50 years ago, Isidore Geoffrey Street. Hilaire commented that, if one were to classify the island of Madagascar exclusively on zoological considerations, and without reference to its geographic situation, it could prove neither Asiatic nor African, but very different from either, and almost the fourth continent, and this fourth continent can be more evidently, in terms of fauna, far more different from Africa, which lies so close to it, than from India so far away. With these words, the truths which later investigations tend to lead them to conclusions, the first French naturalists state an interesting problem for a solution which hypotheses based on scientific knowledge have this new idea which has been put forward. For this fourth continent Isidore Geoffrey is Sclater's Lemuria, that the sunken soils which, containing parts of Africa, must have extended further eastward over southern India and Ceylon, and the highest points are known to us on the volcanic peaks of Bourbon and Mauritius, and in various centers of Madagascar itself, and most recently from the Lemurian and almost extinct race that previously inhabited it. Quote, Atlantis is the root of the Lemuria civilization in the fourth sub-root of the Lemuria continent which can be traced from observations of cultural geology as well as its flora and fauna. The civilization of Atlantis starting from the early civilization, namely Lemuria, has been running for millions of years. Millions of years past which resulted in the sub-roots of the Atlantean civilization which were on the equator. The territory of Lemuria is very large because it is known from the discovery of the Cape Verde Islands site a few miles from the coast of Sierra Leone, in a southeast direction through Africa, Australia, the Island Society and several islands in the middle of the ocean, several miles far from a large island continent, about the size of currently South America, spread over the rest of the Pacific Ocean, and includes Cape Horn and parts of Patagonia. An extremely wide array on the map of Lemuria is of great length, and due to its decline it becomes a subset that is ultimately only small, from the strait separating the two great continents to that which the continent has currently divided, and it is known that it currently exists. In the strait between the islands of Bali and Lombok coincides with part of the strait which then divides the two continents. The strait continues from north to west, up to the east coast of Kalimantan, concludes Ernst Haeckel. Map showing Lemuria in later time, from the story of Atlantis and the lost Lemuria. According to Scott Elliott, a series of natural disasters preceded the final sinking of the continent. With reference to the distribution of fauna and flora, and the existence of so many types common to India and Africa have in common, pointed out by Mr. Blandford, it will be observed that between parts of India and large parts of Africa there was a direct land connection during the first map period, and that the similarity was partly retained in the second map period as well, while a comparison of the map of Atlantis with those of Lemuria would show that land communications were continuous, now in one, to the present day. The mention of the island of Poseidones which was later referred to as Sunda Island or Sunda Land, identical to the word Poseidon, is the last island from the rest to the continent of Atlantis which then sank in 9564 BC, forming the island that is as seen today, with the designation Nusantara. In several studies, it was stated that previous human beings were giant, which is also possible that the Lemurian civilization was inhabited by humans with large sizes. With the body of the first race of human civilization with astral forms then gradually enveloped in physical form. But although the second root race may have been called physical, their bodies made up of ether, they were both visible to vision today. There is an explanation for this in the name of Manu. For the word Manu, we will find a complete explanation of Balinese culture below which proves that the civilization of the archipelago was the earliest civilization that existed on Earth. It should be noted here that the technology of the Lemurian civilization is at the highest level on Earth and has even been able to live on Mars, Earth and Mercury, namely from the second etheric race. Then, in the third race is the Lemurian civilization race. Their bodies have become material, which consists of gas, liquid and solid, which are the three lowest subdivisions of the physical plane, but gas and liquid still dominate. Wheat plants and bees are from the planet Venus, not native to planet Earth. It was not until the middle of the Lemurian period that humans developed a strong bone structure. To explain the possible process by which the etheric form changed to a more physical form, and the soft and bony physical form eventually developed into the human-like structure it is today, can be found in research on permanent physical atoms. Description of the Lemurian Man. What follows is a description of a Lemurian man of the sub-race, possibly the fifth. His stature is gigantic, with a height between 12 and 15 feet. His skin is very dark, yellowish-brown in color. He has a long lower jaw, a flat face, small but sharp eyes, and the distance between the eyes is far apart, so he can looking to the side as well as in front, while there is an eye on the back of the head, on which part of the head there is no hair. Of course it allows him to look towards the back. He did not have a forehead, but there seemed to be a roll of head flesh that could move tilted back and up in a rather strange way. His arms and legs were proportionately longer than humans today, and could not be perfectly straightened at either the elbows or knees, large hands and feet, and a heel that allows it to walk backwards in a rigid manner. The figure wrapped in a loose cloak came from the skin of an animal, like a rhinoceros, but more scaly, perhaps the skin of an animal we now know only from fossil remains. Around his head, where the hair grew quite short, a piece of skin attached to bright tufts of red, blue and other colors. In his left hand he held a weapon, which was undoubtedly used for defense or attack. His right hand twisted the end of a long rope made of some kind of plant root, where he led a large and terrifying reptile, somewhat resembling a plesiosaur. The Lemurians really took possession of these beasts and trained them and employed them in hunting other animals. The description of a Lemurian man in the developing seventh sub-race leads to a superior and kind breed, although the physical appearance is not like that of the males alive today. While the appearance is of a lower jaw, heavy thick lips, flat face, and amazingly protruding eyes, they have foreheads, while the shape of the heels has been considerably reduced. In one of these seventh-pronged sub-races, the head can be described as almost egg-shaped, the small end of the egg being the very top, with the eyes wide and very close to the top. Stature was not large, and the appearance of the hands, feet and limbs in general had become more like people today with the physical appearance of today's Negroes. The people of this seventh branch of the sub-race were in an enduring civilization, and for thousands of years dominated some of the other tribes living in the vast Lemurian continent, and even at the end of the Lemurian civilization, when the extinction of the previous sub-racial groups seemed to have survived, they intermarried the first sub-race of Atlantis. Lemurian lineage, while retaining the characteristics of the third branch sub-race, in physical appearance belong to the fourth branch sub-race, and their general appearance does not differ from that of some American Indians, except that their skin is bluish. Scott Elliott writes that the continent was gradually destroyed, with disasters occurring 800,000, 200,000 and 80,000 years ago, with the last remnants of Atlantis becoming the continent island Poseidones, located near the Azores, which in 9564 BC was sunk in catastrophe, which is referenced in many ancient writings, including those in Plato. In Atlantis, the ancient Golden Age civilization gradually degenerated into a nation of barbarism because people, who only followed their own passions, became civilizational destruction and destroyers of life. Plunder and anarchy come to the point of completely losing control. Over time the cities were lost and destroyed. Barbarism reigned in Atlantis from 30,000 BC to 16,000 BC, when the Great Poseid civilization emerged. Lemurian volcano. During the latter part of the 6th and 7th sub-races they learned to build large cities. With this mega-architecture, befitting their gigantic bodies, the first cities built over the region along the mountains of the continent were visible on the island of Madagascar. Other major cities described in the Secret Doctrine have also been entirely built in volcanic areas. Located about 30 miles west of Easter Island was then destroyed by a series of volcanic eruptions. Giant Easter Island statues, with a height of about 27 feet with shoulders 8 feet further from Lemuro Atlantis, that the statues also began to be erected. Religion developed in the 7th sub-race with symbols symbolizing worship of the sun. The destruction of the continent of Lemuria was different from the fate of the civilization after it, namely Atlantis, which was drowned by a large tidal wave. The continent of Lemuria was destroyed by volcanism. Occurs due to burning and hot dust from many volcanoes. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions are truly catastrophic more than those of Atlantis. Total loss of land, as in the case of Krakatoa in 1883 for the entire series of volcanic disasters on the continent of Lemuria. A descendant of the most intelligent Lemurian was left on Earth. His name is Arkhidirima, 2000-3000 BC. He was the forerunner of a great leader who became the caretaker in building human civilization. His story was immortalized in folklore and legends. The Sundanese people call it Aki Tyarm. In the coastal areas of East Java, it is called Angling Dharma. Some call it the Wali Jangkung. The story is a connecting chain between civilizations since the prophet Adam to the present, Arkhidirima until now, hibernate, in one of the pyramids under the Indonesian Sea. According to Churchward, the Lemuria, Mu, can actually be said to be a nation that also glorifies the existence of the sun as their god or helper. Almost all of Lemuria, Mu civilization lived in houses with see-through roofs. They are always free from stress and disease, and can be up to hundreds of years old. Lemuria civilization and culture have been good at developing their ESP, extrasensory perception, ability for nearly 40,000 years and are used in everyday life as well as in research. With centuries of ability, the Mu nation gained a reputation as masters of telepathy, interstellar migration, and teleportation. All this caused no need for vehicles in their civilization. Almost all scientists who write stories about the Lemuria, Mu people say that they are generally a vegetarian nation, live in agriculture, live outside, outdoors, have a culture to live in balance with nature and the earth, and only use a little scientific technology. The Lemurians were more concentrated on meditating and developing especially. The average Lemurian nation, Mu, is not interested in technology like the Atlanteans who lived in an era after him and prefers to experiment with psychic energy to move objects, as evidenced by Uri Geller in his research at Stanford University in the 1970s, even though it also uses high-frequency waves, solar energy, crystal energy, and teleportation to create and move objects. A research report on culture in the Lemurian civilization, written by a man named Cherve, a Rosicrucian historian, describes the tests that had to be carried out before marriage by young Lemurians before marriage. The elders tell the men and women to give all their belongings so that they have nothing without clothes, food, a house, shelter for shelter, or household tools. The woman and man are then left in the wilderness for a month, 28 days, without clothes. Within that time, they have to make a shelter, make their own clothes, find their own food, make equipment, and give it to their partner without getting into arguments and without any bad thoughts between the two of them. If they pass the test, they will be married off and their previous property will be returned to them. However, if the test fails, they will run, then they will not be married off. Migration. According to Cherve, a Rosicrucian historian, the Lemurians migrated from the mid-Pacific continent to the continent of Atlantis where they developed towards perfection. Relic evidence describes the existence of amazing discoveries, which seem like science fiction stories. The lamp that has been burning brightly for thousands of years without being treated, which is told by countless ancient writers, is one of the legacies of Atlantis. Some of these magic lamps were still burning when Spanish explorers found them in remote parts of the Amazon jungle from 10,000 years later, documented in Robert Charu's book. Ancient historical researchers found a magic lamp still burning in Egypt, which is the colony of Atlantis named Luxor, more than 9 centuries after the flood, in the temple doors that are reportedly able to open and close automatically, and guarded by robots. An observer of culture and civilization, from Indonesia, Diki Zainal Arifin, gave his opinion about this inscription stone. According to him, the writing contained in this inscription is a siloka or a term that has a hidden purpose. The inscription on the Sadahurup inscription reads, Anjana Gafita Hyanga, Avatara Maninga Runga, Shahudubala Aryadumita, Zakala Manigwar Hazina, meaning, you are the gate of the Creator, controller of the entire gross subtle universe, balancing the universal life. Time will be an obedient child. Quote. This is Diki Zainal Arifin's version of the Lemurian writings. Lemurian letters and numbers. The Lemurians had their own letters and numbers known as the Lemurian script. Lemurian letters are letters that were first used and became the forerunners of the letters we use today, starting from Latin letters, Arabic, and so on. Lemurian letters are not ordinary letters. This letter goes along with the ups and downs of thought waves and the human gene code. The Lemurian letters are descriptions of brain waves, telepathic language, movement of water, and the emission of forces, waves, frequencies, and all that is natural. In the writing of the Lemurian letters, there are no capital or lowercase letters. They are all written the same way. Writing letters starts from right to left. Reading it starts from right to left too. This follows the movement of the universe moving from right to left. Lemurian numerals start from 0 to 5. Just like Lemurian letters, the way to write and read them starts from right to left. The number 0, 0, has existed since the time of the Lemurians. Unlike the Roman numerals, which did not recognize 0, 0. This is because 0, 0, is like an empty state and must be denoted. Actually, the number starts from 0, 0, not from 1, 1, because before the existence of 1 the condition is still empty and this is denoted by 0, 0. The Lemuria numeral system is also related to the natural sound of pentatonic tones. Penta means 5, 5, but it is clear that the tone of donati lada is not like the pentatonic notes of today. Lemurian and similarities to the archipelago script. As stated in the stanza of Xian, the people of that era, even though they had become completely physical, they did not speak verbally with the mouth like humans do today. Of course, this astral and ether ancestor of the third root race was unnecessary to produce a series of sounds to convey their thoughts, living as they do in the astral and ether states, but when the human becomes physical he cannot fully communicate. Science says that sound was a way for primitive people to express their thoughts, originally consisting entirely of vowels. Over time consonants gradually came into use, but the development of language from beginning to end in the continent of Lemuria never reached beyond the syllable phase. Chinese is the only language that is considered to be a direct descendant of the ancient Lemurian language. The ancestors of China mainly come from the fourth sub-race or the roots of the Turanian fourth race. 4. All mankind at that time from one language and one lip. In Humboldt's classification of language, Chinese, as we know it, is called isolating, which is distinguished from the more highly developed agglutinative and still more highly developed inflectional. From the book, The Story of Atlantis, it is written that many different languages developed on the continent, but all had agglutinative or, as Max Muller prefers to call it, type combinatory, whereas development was still higher than its inflectional pronunciation on the tongue. Arya and Semitic, this is in the era of the fifth root Ross. The wars that took place in Lemuria continued even to the end of the seventh sub-race. It was started by the civilization of Atlantis, which developed the principle of strife as a fundamental characteristic of the roots of the fourth race. Atlantic as we know it, wars and battles that continue to occur on land and sea. And so rooted during the Atlantean period, the strife became characteristic until now and developed until the Aryan race was always ready to go to war with each other. Lenormand and Cheval, ANC. East. Hist. Volume. E. p. 208. The Egyptians said about the hieroglyphic system, they in terms of writing do not think of writing as their own invention, but the thing about writing is considered the language of the gods. The gods, who were, without a doubt, their very civilized ancestors, were the people of Atlantis, who, as we will see later, their ancestors have been thought to be the gods of many Mediterranean races. Diego de Landa is the first bishop of the Yucatan. He wrote the history of the Mayans and wrote them in manuscripts in Madrid in the library of the Royal Academy of History. This document contains descriptions and explanations of the phonetic alphabet of Mayas. The Landa manuscript appears to have been neglected in libraries to reveal about Atlantis until it was discovered by the French priest Brasseur de Bourbourg, with whom the Landa text had deciphered several old American writings. He said, the alphabet and signs described by Landa from the text on the Rosetta Stone. Baldwin, Old American, p. 191. This is in the alphabet of the Mayas, the ancient people on the Yucatan Peninsula, who claimed that their civilization came to them across the sea on ships from the east, that is, from the direction of Atlantis. In the study of the Mayan alphabet we find one important thing. There is no letter R in the Maya alphabet. In the Roman alphabet R grew from Phoenician, then R was formed. Therefore, you will know that the early Phoenician alphabet did not contain the letter R. We now turn to the Phoenician alphabet. We will find the letter P, given thus, a very natural representation of an R lying on its face. Is it no other extraordinary coincidence that P in both Maya and Phoenicia, must contain this single sign. If the Phoenician alphabet is related to the Maya alphabet, as I think it is clear, then the Phoenicians of the same race, or some of the races with which Mayas are connected. In other words, they came from Atlantis. Now we know that Phoenician and Hebrew were from the same stock, used the same alphabet, and spoke almost the same language. The Phoenician tradition has come down to us in the writings, from Sanchoniathon, of all the discoveries of great importance or discoveries that underlie civilization. The first two humans, they tell us, were Protogonos and Ion, Adam and Havith, who produced Genos and Genia, Shun and Kenneth, from whom three brothers, named Phos, Fur, and Phlox, light, fire, and fire, because they had found a way to produce fire by the friction of two pieces of wood, and had taught the use of this element. In other fragments, at the origins of mankind we see in the succession of fraternal pairs of natives and Technites, Adam and Cain. Inventor of brick making. Agros and Agrotes, Shade and Ced, fathers of agriculturists and hunters. Then Aminos and Magos, who taught to live in villages and rear cattle. The connection between the Atlantean tradition and the biblical record is shown in many ways. For example, the Greek text, in expressing Aminos' discovery, uses the words komas kai poimnas, which is exactly the same as the term ohel eumachne, who uses the Bible to speak from the abode of the descendants of Jabal, Gen. Chap. IV. V. 20, in such a way as Lamech, both in the meaning of his name and also in IV. The savage character attributed to him by the legend which sticks to his memory, is the true synonym of Agrotes. Quote. And the title Alatai, given to Agros and Agrotes in Greek Phoenician history, fits admirably with the physiognomy of the Cain race in the biblical narrative, whether we take Alatai only as a Hellenistic transcription of Semitic Elam, the mighty, or do we take it in the Greek acceptance of the wanderer? For that was the destiny of Cain and the race according to the very terms of the punishment which was inflicted upon him after his crimes, Gen. IV. 14, and this is what is marked by the name of his grandson, Yered. The genealogy does not end with Aminos and Magos, like that of Cain in the Bible with the three sons of Lamech. The two figures were successful with Miser and Siddiq, who were released and only, as Sanchoniathon translated it, but rather, upright and only, Mishor and Kuduk, which creates the use of salt. To Miser was born Tatos, toned, to whom we owe the letters, and for Siddiq the Kabiri or Corribants, the institutors of navigation. Lenormand, The Line Between Adam and the Flood. Contemporary Review, April, 1880.